Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. An issue has come up that is a concern to some of the brothers that they wanted to have addressed, and that is what is commonly known amongst the brothers, that wiping the hands, wiping the face with one's hands after making dua, whether after the salat or any time, that's an innovation, and there is no evidence to establish that from the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. That's what's commonly known especially amongst the younger brothers who have taken to learn about the sunnah from the authentic sources. They have found that the scholars of hadith that they've read from have criticized that narration, or the narrations that would support that action, wiping the face with the hands after making supplications. And so they are nearly convinced, if not convinced, that there is no argument for the one who says that you can wipe your face with your hands after supplicating. And I wanted to offer this evening just a point on that, which was already posted on the website called Salafi Talk, apparently from June 8th, 2006, which was last summer. So I narrate from my own self that I said 1 year ago when I had my books with me and I was quoting from the books that Sheikh ibn Baz talked about the chain that supports the hadith, and the hadith originally is in Bulugh al-Maram, if you wanted to reference it, number 1345, and I believe that's according to the English translation. 1345. Let's see if it's here, just like that. 1345. Yeah. وعن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنه قال كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا مد يديه في الدعاء لم يردهما حتى يمسح بهما وجهه. أخرجه الترمذي وله شواهد منها حديث ابن عباس عند أبي داود وغيره ومجموعها يقتضي أنه حديث حسن. This is in the Dar es Salaam printing of Bulugh al-Maram. That when the English reads, whenever Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam raised his hands in supplication, he did not lower them till he wiped his face with them. At-Tirmidhi reported it, and it has shawahid, supporting narrations, such as the hadith of Ibn Abbas reported by Abu Dawood and others. These narrations, considered as a group, warrant it being considered Hasan hadith, a Hasan hadith. A hadith that is Hasan. The first thing you notice there is Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar has considered this hadith to be Hasan, and he's an imam, a great scholar of hadith. Now we're going to mention some of the other scholars who also considered the strengthening of these chains to allow the hadith to be considered to be Hasan. From the books of the explanation of this book, Bulugh al-Maram, do you know of any that we could refer to? Okay, everyone knows who is part of the course now. Al-Amir As-San'ani Muhammad ibn Ismail, the author of Subul As-Salam. Everyone should have that clearly in their mind. They've been quizzed on it a number of times, and they just took the final exam maybe, or they're preparing for it. So now, Subul As-Salam, one of the best books by Al-Amir As-San'ani, in explanation of Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar's book. In that book, As-San'ani considers the hadith to be authentic as well. Now, also, you can refer to the book of Sadiq Hasan Khan. The Sadiq Hasan Khan has an explanation of Bulugh al-Maram. And he also came to the conclusion that the hadith is to be considered Hasan by way of mutual support, by way of different chains. Sheikh bin Baz rahimahullah has ta'liqat, has some footnotes on Bulugh al-Maram. In his footnotes on Bulugh al-Maram, he said, and I quote, this is from myself, quoting directly from the book in Mecca. So I don't have the book in front of me, so I'm quoting from myself, who quoted from the book last summer. In its chain is Hamad ibn Isa al-Juhani al-Wasiti. Most of the scholars have declared him to be da'if. Ibn Hajar as well followed suit in At-Taqrib. And what's Taqrib at-Tahdhib? It's that book with the narrators from the 6 books of hadith that we learned about. And he said about him that he's da'if from the 9th category, and he died in the year 208. Da'if. So Ibn Hajar, the very one who called this hadith Hasan, he called the narrator da'if. But we said Ibn Hajar, it says it has shawahid, it has supporting narrations from Abu Dawood, from a different hadith, from Ibn Abbas's hadith and Abu Dawood. So he wasn't calling it Hasan by way of this chain only. He was calling it Hasan li ghayrihi, as we discussed in our Sciences of Hadith class. And I want you to note that that was the reason we took that class of terminology and hadith, so that when we read these kind of words and an issue comes up like this now, in the past we would just say, what did Al-Albani say? Forget everything. What did Al-Albani say? If you're pleased with following blindly the rulings of any one of the scholars, like those worthy of being followed when you don't have knowledge, like Shaykh Al-Albani, or like Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar, or like the scholars of hadith that are on that caliber, you might say, forget it. What did my Shaykh say about it? And that's enough for me. Now that you have gained some tools and some knowledge about what's that mean, Sahih li ghayrihi, Hasan li ghayrihi, the narrator is da'if and it has shawahid, it has support from other narrations. Now you have some insight as to what Ibn Hajar was talking about. As before, you might say, what is he talking about? There's a da'if guy in the chain, it's over. Right? Once the narrator is da'if, how can you take his hadith? Now you understand it comes from a chain that's da'if and also another chain that's da'if, and you put the two da'if chains together and you get Hasan li ghayrihi. And this was a decision made by a number of hadith scholars. Ibn Baz rahimahullah ta'ala basically pointed out the weakness and left it like that. So as if to say the hadith is not authentic, agreeing with what we know from Shaykh Muhammad Nasir ad-Din al-Albani rahimahumullah ta'ala. Shaykh Abdullah al-Bassam, from the modern day scholars, he has a book called Tawdih al-Ahkam, a sharh of Bulugh al-Maram, a very expansive sharh. I believe it goes into 9 volumes or 8 volumes. A very good sharh, a very strong sharh. And he mentions about this hadith in his explanation of Bulugh al-Maram, that this hadith has supporting narrations that strengthen each other. Thus, the hadith gains strength from these routes, and a number of scholars have chosen this position that it is authentic. From them, Ishaq ibn Rahuya, from the early Imams of Hadith, or the early Imams of the Sunnah. An-Nawawi, in one of the 2 positions that he has on it, meaning that another narration he criticized the Hadith. Ibn Hajar, as we just mentioned, from Subul al-Salam, from Bulugh al-Maram. And Al-Munawi. Al-Munawi has a famous book, an explanation of Suyuti's Al-Jami' al-Saghir. It's called Fayd al-Qadir. Fayd al-Qadir. Fi Sharh al-Jami' al-Saghir. Al-Munawi was, I think he died in 1031 or something around there, about 100 years after Suyuti. He has a very expansive explanation in 6 volumes of Al-Jami' al-Saghir of Suyuti, which is a collection of about 10,000 hadith from different sources. And in that book he called it Hasan as well. He called it authentic. As-San'ani, we're talking about here. Al-Amir As-San'ani, the author of Subul al-Salam. Al-Shawkani, Muhammad ibn Ali Al-Shawkani, who died in 1250. He was the author of Nail al-Awtar and Sayl al-Jarrar and other books in fiqh, and was very strong. And others. And then what you find, it's important as well. After having said this, and me personally, even to this day, I haven't looked at the chains of the ahadith and really looked into the details of the issue. But I quoted this only to let you know that there is legitimate differing here. There are bona fide scholars of hadith who have spoken in favor of the authenticity of this hadith, and thus in favor of the practice that would be based on such a hadith. I mentioned that to let you know that it is not as if you take the position that the hadith is not established, after studying the chain, and that's what makes you happy in terms of what you think is correct about this being either an established practice or not, you're doing it upon knowledge and knowing what the scholars of hadith have said about the hadith, then even when you take that position, you would realize that there are a number of scholars who have allowed this practice based on what they consider to be the authenticity of this report. And it's not befitting for the blind follower. And I have to repeat this often. If you are going to blindly follow any scholar and take his ruling on the hadith without having knowledge of why, especially when we're talking about a hadith that's between da'if and hasan li ghayrihi. If you're going to say it's da'if because, for example, Shaykh Al-Albani called it da'if, then the blind follower, it's not permissible for him to order other people to blindly follow the shaykh that he has blindly followed. Understand that principle in blindly following. When you yourself are forced to blindly follow, right, because you can't understand the issue, whether it's an issue of a hadith being authentic or a fiqh issue or whatever, it's not entirely easy for you, being a non-Arab or whatever, someone who doesn't have access to the statements of the scholars about the issue and the evidences, it's not entirely clear. So in that case, you pick one of the scholars who is known for his diligence, for his knowledge in that field, and for his taqwa, who's worthy of being followed, and you take his position. When you do that, you do not order the other people to follow the same scholar you have chosen. That's not permissible, that leads to chaos. It leads to fighting between the Muslims. It leads to discord. Rather, you say in this case, Akhi, Allah knows best, but I found Shaykh Al-Albani called it da'if. And I haven't studied the chain, but that Shaykh is worthy of being followed, so I've chosen to follow him, and I don't do that. But as for you prohibiting other people, when you prohibit someone from a practice, ordering and prohibiting is done upon knowledge, not upon blindly following. Ordering and prohibiting, ordering the good and forbidding the evil is done upon knowledge, not upon blind following. So if you have blindly followed someone in the ruling of the hadith, either for or against it, you cannot force the other people to take the position you have taken, because it's not based on ilm, it's based on taqleed, blind following. And that from that you understand that the falsehood of the person who says, Ahl Sunnah or the Salafis or whatever words you want to use, the people of the Haqq, they never make taqleed. Right? That's falsehood. We make taqleed. When do we make taqleed though? Because, at each and every stage, even when we know the evidences from the book and the Sunnah, we make taqleed and forget the book and the Sunnah? No, that's not permissible ever. As the Shafi'i and others said, the Ummah has ijma', that it's not for anyone who understands something from the book and the Sunnah to leave it for the opinion of anyone. So the taqleed that is to be prohibited is the taqleed done in opposition to the book and the Sunnah. However, when a person does not know what is correct from the book and the Sunnah, he does not know, he's trying to find out, he reads some books of knowledge, but it doesn't become clear to him. In that case, he's forced to have a position. He's forced to either do the action or not do the action. He's forced to have a position. So he takes a position based on taqleed in that case. Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah, as our Shaykh Muhammad Umar Bazmul narrated to us, Imam al-Shafi'i himself, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah ta'ala himself, he said, if I've looked into a matter, وَلَمْ يَتَرَجَّحْ لَدَيَّ شَيْء, and there's nothing has become clear to me, what's the rajih in the issue? أُحِبُّ أَن يَكُونَ قَوْلَ الشَّافِعِ قَوْلِي. I love and I prefer that the position of a Shafi'i be my position. What does that mean? Imam Ahmad blindly followed a Shafi'i. Not generally like that, but Imam Ahmad, when it came down to when he could not decide what's correct in the issue. And every scholar, no matter how knowledgeable he is, he'll come to an issue where he doesn't know. Nobody can say that they know all of the issues in the deen. Even Imam Ahmad would say, when I've studied an issue and it's not clear to me based on the book and the sunnah, the evidences, what's appropriate or what's the right decision, I just take a Shafi'i's position. I love that I take a Shafi'i's position in such a case. Meaning that under necessity, when a person tries to find out what's correct, and he can't do it, and he has to have a position on the hadith, he has to have a position on the fiqh issue, so he takes the position of a knowledgeable scholar in Islam, one known for his knowledge and his piety. Not necessarily one of the four imams, not necessarily Al-Albani, not necessarily Ibn Baz, not necessarily any one of those, but any scholar who's known for his knowledge and piety, of past or present. Having said that, Allahu A'lam, just to refute the idea that there's no taqleed for the follower, for Ahl Sunnah. There's no such thing as taqleed. Some people say that. And it's a statement of falsehood. It's a statement of falsehood that sometimes, out of necessity, a person makes taqleed. And when he does, he has to know the rulings. Because what happens is some people claim, we never make taqleed. We always follow the evidences. And you find those people, they're the ones saying, Akhi, this is bid'ah to wipe your face with your hands after making dua. It's bid'ah, it's bid'ah. And when the person says, well, I read something about it and I found Munawi, Shawkani, San'ani, Fulan, Fulan, he names scholars who called the hadith authentic and said it's an authentic practice from the Prophet ﷺ. We follow the evidences. We don't make taqleed of those people. And the reality is he's making taqleed of Shaykh Muhammad Nasruddin al-Albani from basically what's reached him from Shaykh Muhammad Nasruddin al-Albani. And it's not important to him at all what Ibn Hajar said or what any one of the other scholars have said. This is the kind of blindly following that's mazmoom. It leads to the Muslims splitting up into groups. Each one follows a sheikh blindly and they refute the others by the blind following of their sheikh. This is prohibited. And it's not from Salafiyyah. And it's not from the way of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'at. It's not from the way of Ahl Haqq in any way whatsoever. So sometimes a person is required, or sometimes a person will be forced to follow blindly because he cannot, come to the conclusion on his own. When he does, he has to know that there are manners for doing that. And just because that was the decision I made, because of the sheikh I chose to follow in that case, it doesn't mean I have to go and tell the people or prohibit them from opposing that and order them to follow that just like I have. Having said that, I hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us some benefit to that. And lastly, there's a footnote in this Dar es Salaam printing. I'm not even sure exactly where it comes from. I believe I read the words of a San'ani about this hadith and did not find it. I could be mistaken, but it says in the footnote, it thus becomes known that after completing one's supplication, one is advised to wipe his face with the palms of his hands. This is basically the conclusion of those who call the hadith authentic. However, this additional statement is a cause for concern. If we know that Allah does not turn one away empty-handed, then it is as though His rahmah, His mercy, has descended upon one's palms. It is thus befitting that this rahmah be transferred to the face, which is the noblest part of the body and the most entitled to be honored. I think what I remember coming to a conclusion about was that was basically from the translator, and it wasn't from the words of a San'ani, and Allah knows best. I could be mistaken in that. It needs to be reviewed from Subul Salam, and that would be a mistake from the publishers or from the people who put the footnote in there, if that's the case, since the book on the cover says Subul Salam, or Bulugh al-Maram with footnotes from Muhammad ibn Ismail al-San'ani. It doesn't mention any footnotes from anyone else. So then, if there are footnotes here, it should be from the book Subul al-Salam by al-San'ani and not from the translator. Wallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam. Naam, Anwar.
So what happened? I went out to get some drink.
What happened? You're famous for that, Anwar. You're famous for that. May Allah excuse you. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.